So, I don't know how many of y'all knew this, but pretty deep secret, okay? Stevie Ray Vaughan is the only blues guitarist, actually. And in fact, he invented the blues. Nobody played the blues before Stevie Ray Vaughan. Nobody has even played the blues properly since then. It's all him. Just Stevie Ray Vaughan. That's it. Obviously, I am being facetious, but today is a little bit of just a short rant, a ramble even, about an interesting observation I've made over the past year or so, a little bit more than a year since I've really gotten into blues. Blues guitar, really diving deep into a discography. It's not just blues guitar, but blues harp, blues harmonica, stuff like that. So the main crux of this video is, for a lot of people, Stevie Ray Vaughan is like literally the only cultural touchstone they have for blues and blues rock, blues guitar, everything like that. Of course, for some folks who are a little bit older, maybe it's Eric Clapton, maybe, it's also George Thorogood. We're talking about like, some boomer rock here for sure. Some people do know pre-Stevie Ray Vaughan legends like B.B. King, Buddy Guy, Freddie King, Albert King, the Three Kings, stuff like that. But for the most part, for a lot of people, Stevie Ray Vaughan and Stevie Ray Vaughan alone is synonymous with the blues as a genre and blues guitar just as a style of guitar playing. And I think you definitely see that with the way a lot of modern blues guitarists play. And what's so incredible and what really demonstrates how profound Stevie Ray Vaughan's impact was on not just blues but also just rock music in general is everything from his tone to his technique is still imitated to this day by blues guitarists. And it's like, in some ways, playing blues in the post-Stevie Ray Vaughan era is like a competition of who can sound the most like Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like, his iconic guitar tone became just the standard for blues guitar after his unfortunate passing. And it really is crazy how you can literally divide like the history of the blues, at least in the United States of America, into a pre-Stevie Ray Vaughan and a post-Stevie Ray Vaughan era. And this video is not meant to be critical, by the way. I am a huge Stevie Ray Vaughan fan. Like many young kids my age, young white kids, Stevie Ray Vaughan was sort of my introduction to blues music. I wouldn't say he was the first blues artist I ever listened to. Growing up, I remember a lot of George Thorogood and the Destroyers playing on, local classic rock radio, Bad to the Bone, Who Do You Love? And so through that, I became sort of familiar with, the sound of blues slide guitar without even really knowing it. But Stevie Ray Vaughan and my dad, allowing me to listen to his old Stevie Ray Vaughan tapes from back when he was my age now, definitely that was sort of my introduction into really getting an awareness of the blues and wanting to emulate that. And that was several years ago. Now over the past year, as I've said, I've really been diving into actually studying blues, diving into more obscure artists, and especially the Alligator Records catalog. That's my favorite blues record label of all time. I mean, their roster is like a who's who of blues guitarists, blues harmonica players, blues singers. Really an impressive discography for just one label. But something that I've noticed just in listening to the blues more often over the past year and talking to people about the blues, it's like there really is a steep drop-off between who like the blues A-listers and legends are and then everyone else. Whereas like in country music, for example, I also love country music, especially old school country music. You have your A-list stars of the current era. Then you have your A-list legends. Then you have like B-listers of the current era. But then you also have B-list legends, like artists who may have been popular for a period of time and are known for a few hits, known for a few hit albums, but of course they didn't have as much longevity as someone like George Strait, right? So for example, Tracy Lawrence is someone in country music who is like a B-list legend, where they've had massive hits, sold millions of records, but they didn't carry on the same amount of longevity that someone like Alan Jackson had, where they were successful and on top of the game for like multiple decades in a row, right? So that's sort of what I mean. Whereas in blues, there's like, sort of like there's like an A-list, there's like a superstar list grouped in with the legends. That's where, Buddy Guy, Stevie Ray Vaughan, B.B. King, Joe Bonamassa, that's where they hang out. And then like there's a steep drop off where there's just like everyone else. And I know there's going to be someone in the comments like, oh, on the list of A-listers, you forgot to mention so-and-so. It's a hypothetical list. I'm not going to mention every single person, okay? Like I've had this debate in like Reddit comment sections before. It's the same way with metalheads, like where if you reference like, oh, my favorite bands of the 1980s are XYZ, someone would come and be like, oh, you forgot so-and-so. How could you forget so-and-so? You're a poser, dude. It's like, I'm not trying to make a comprehensive list. I'm just using as an example, okay? Chill out. Like I said, you have your A-list blues guitarists and legends, and then you have just everyone else. And it's like, in terms of public normie knowledge, to say everyone else who's like not super into the blues and super a geek about it is a normie, it's like the divide between who normies know, who the mainstream knows, versus who like actual hardcore blues fans know, is like, the gap is crazy. It's a huge gap. And for a lot of people, like the one centerpiece, like I said, the one cultural touchstone for blues is Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I saw this sort of play out in real life in discussions with people when I was working at a job, and in the shop they would allow us to play, you know, Pandora stations sometimes. So I actually had a Pandora station based around Luther Allison, and that's someone who, like, if you don't know who Luther Allison is, like, you're missing out. Luther Allison, awesome, was around since the late 60s. In my opinion, his finest albums are the ones he recorded with Alligator Records up until his untimely passing in the 1990s. He recorded 3 albums for him, 3 of the finest blues albums of the 90s. If you have not heard those, go check them out. You're really missing out if you haven't. But the playlist was based around, you know, Luther Allison. And so, you know how Pandora works. It's like an algorithm. It's not really like truly a randomized playlist. So they'll play everyone who you know is just in general with the blues. Like, so there's plenty of Stevie Ray Vaughan and others on the playlist. And I would have customers coming in while I was playing this playlist, and any time they heard a blues song, they would ask me, oh, is this Stevie Ray Vaughan? And so it's interesting because, you know, as a guitarist and as a guitar nerd, as someone who just listens to so much music, and a lot of you other guitar nerds will be able to back me up on this, when you listen to so much music, you begin to recognize a guitar player just based on how they play. Like, you don't even need to hear their names. You can just hear a guitar solo. You can hear the way they write riffs. You can say, oh, that guitar player is so-and-so. You recognize their tone. You recognize their technique, their licks, their riffs. So I have listened to so much, you know, blues at this point that I can tell who's who. Like, you know, obviously you know who Stevie Ray Vaughan is. You can tell when it's Buddy Guy. You can tell when it's Johnny Winter, right? So you can tell these guys apart. But what's so interesting is, to the average person off the street, you know, a normie who doesn't have any knowledge of blues besides, you know, the mainstream legendary guys, for them, Stevie Ray Vaughan was like the default guy. I remember one guy coming in off the street, and, you know, the song that was playing over Pandora was just like, you know, typical regular blues shuffle, right? Something like that, you know, probably slower, who cares? You know, it was that chord progression, you know, March and E. And the guy, when I was playing the song, was just like, oh, he's playing Stevie Ray Vaughan music. So it's just like, it was just so interesting to me. I'm not trying to hate on the guy and be like an angry hipster, by the way. He's like, oh, people only know Stevie Ray Vaughan and Eric Clapton and the Legends. It's actually a fascinating phenomenon to me that, you know, this person off the street, they heard, you know, a blues chord progression, and they just instantly applied it to Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like the guy said, oh, Stevie Ray Vaughan music. As in, like, to this guy's knowledge, Stevie Ray Vaughan is the only person who has ever played songs like that before. And there's a couple more examples. One time I was playing a song by Michael Burks, who was another guitarist who recorded for Alligator Records, also had an unfortunate passing on, you know, during his career, very untimely. And I was playing one of his songs, and it was also like a shuffle type song. And of course, Michael Burks is, you know, a modern era type guy. He came up in the thousands. That was when he got his big break. So, you know, post Stevie Ray Vaughan era. So definitely, you know, no modern blues guitarist is completely divorced from the Stevie Ray Vaughan school of playing and technique, right? So was there a little bit of Stevie Ray Vaughan in the song that it was playing? Perhaps, but you could still tell, like, by the tone, by just the production, that it was not a Stevie Ray Vaughan song. It was not of Stevie Ray Vaughan's era. It was definitely a more recent song. You know, Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff sounds like it came out in the 1980s, and he has, of course, that very iconic tone that's all his own. And so, you know, this Michael Burks song, you know, to anyone who actually has an ear for blues and for blues guitars, they would know that that's not Stevie Ray Vaughan. But the guy asked, he was like, hey, is this Stevie Ray Vaughan? And I said, no. And the guy was like, oh, okay. Like he doubted me, like he thought I was lying to him. And then of course he came around and asked, like, okay, who is this? And I told him the song, and I told him it was Michael Burks, and he was like, oh, okay, cool. Like, so it was fine, but it was just so funny that this guy heard a blues song, was like, is this Stevie Ray Vaughan? Even though it does not sound like any Stevie Ray Vaughan song. And when I told him no, he thought I was like lying to him. One other example, I was playing Roy Buchanan. Now, Roy Buchanan, super underrated guy, should be way better known. If you want to talk about a dude who could just push his instrument to the limit, like with his bends, and just could create the most chaotic, just angry sounds, Roy Buchanan is your guy. Like, that's how I would describe Roy Buchanan's style of guitar playing. Like, he just sounds angry. Another guy who unfortunately passed on early. I was playing one of his songs in the shop. I think it was Ramones Blues. And so as I mentioned, being able to differentiate between guitars based on their tone and their style, Roy Buchanan and Stevie Ray Vaughan do not sound alike. Anyone who has listened to either of them for enough time knows that for a fact. Roy Buchanan and Stevie Ray Vaughan do not sound alike at all. And so this woman, this very sweet old woman, she'd ask me, "Oh, is this Stevie Ray Vaughan?" And I'm like, no, it's actually Roy Buchanan. She says, "Oh, well, if it's not Stevie Ray Vaughan, they must be cousins." And so again, it's just like this interesting phenomenon. I'm not trying to hate. I'm not trying to be a hipster and be like, "Oh, I know who all these people are, and like these normies don't." I'm just saying it's an interesting phenomenon that I'm just sharing with y'all for this video, that Stevie Ray Vaughan is just the blues guitarist for all these people, so that when they hear a blues song and a blues chord progression, they instantly think it's him. Another example, not relevant to Stevie Ray Vaughan actually, or not directly referencing Stevie Ray Vaughan. I was talking to a guy who's actually a bit older than me. He was a guy who was on the Texas music scene for a while actually. Like he would play in house bands and stuff like that. And so I mentioned that, at that time I was really starting to get into the blues. And he, of course, he named a bunch of guys. He's like, "Oh, like, do you know Stevie Ray Vaughan, Joe Bonamassa, Tab Benoit?" I said, yeah, I know those guys. I wanted to mention, a few Texas guitar players who I thought he might know. And so I brought up Albert Collins. And as soon as I mentioned him, he was kind of like, oh, yeah. And I could tell instantly that he had no idea who I was talking about. And I'm like, bro, how are you going to be a fan of Texas blues and you don't know who Albert Collins is? The Ice Pick? One of the most unique guitarists of all time. And so, as I've said multiple times now, there's definitely a divide between pre-Stevie Ray Vaughan and post-Stevie Ray Vaughan, and just for most of the American public, especially I guess Gen X and younger, even boomers, for a lot of them, it's like Stevie Ray Vaughan is the blues guy. He's just the blues guy. He's the one they know. He's the one reference they have. They know his songs and the blues chord progressions that, of course, are carried on through the ages, carried on through the generation that Stevie Ray Vaughan, of course, employed in his songs. Because one thing you cannot say about Stevie Ray Vaughan, you cannot say he didn't pay tribute to the people who came before him and to his influences. He was very good about that, and that's why they all wanted to work with him, like Albert King and Lonnie Mack and all those guys. And so it's just when people hear these traditional blues chord progressions, they just think, oh, that's Stevie Ray Vaughan. They hear a blues guitar song, they're like, oh, okay, it's Stevie Ray Vaughan. And so it's just a very interesting phenomenon that I wanted to talk about. I just think it's very interesting that for this genre, that really is an integral part of, the American roots music landscape, that a lot of it is still sort of drenched in obscurity, hidden in obscurity, where with the exception of Stevie Ray Vaughan and Buddy Guy and a few others who have had mainstream success, for the most part, it is still a very obscure genre. And blues is like rap in that they're sort of regional areas where it's popular, but there's no blues infrastructure necessarily pop music has in Hollywood and Los Angeles and then country music has in Nashville. There's no sort of blues big industry. There's no sort of big blues machine as far as I can tell. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe I'm totally blanking on some part of history. But like I said, there's lots of regions for blues. There are lots of independent blues record labels that are powerful within, their sphere. But as far as an actual concentrated regional infrastructure, a regional superpower, there really is nothing like that for the blues. And so that's why I think there are, just only a handful of truly mainstream blues guitar players who have actually made a significant impact on popular music. And unfortunately, most of these guitar players, blues harp players and vocalists who are outstanding musicians, they just haven't, really crossed over into the mainstream because there's just not that machine backing them up. So I think this is all just, an interesting trend that I wanted to, reflect on and, share with y'all this very interesting thing where, to a lot of these people, Stevie Ray Vaughan and Stevie Ray Vaughan alone, that's the blues, and that's the only touch point they have. So let me know in the comments if you've experienced something similar. I just thought this would be a fun, quick little rant video. And yeah, let me know. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe. See you next time.